Good morning. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Almer, Chair of the Board of Accountancy Pipeline Committee. I am calling this public meeting to order. Today is Friday, May 2nd, 2025, and the time is 9:04 a.m. This meeting is being held via Zoom video, and it is being recorded. Please be sure to mute your mic through Zoom. When you want to speak, please use the raise your hand or use your hand. Please raise your hand or use the raise your hand feature and unmute when called upon and mute yourself when done speaking. Committee members, the board liaison, and support staff can ask to speak at any time. For any members of the public observing this meeting, please use the public comment opportunity the committee will extend at each meeting unless specifically called upon. If you have public comment, please limit it to the topic of the committee's work. Please do not use the chat room for any discussions. Should any technical issues arise, we will pause the meeting until they are resolved. I will now take a roll call of members and guests. So I'll just go around the screen. Chris, if you could just state your full name.
Christopher Dalvig.
Mary? Mary, you're muted.
Mary Savage.
Scott?
Scott Wright, present, attending via Zoom.
Logan?
Logan Steele, board liaison.
Cynthia?
Cynthia Killingsworth.
Claire?
Claire Costin.
And from the Board of Accountancy, we have Martin.
Here, Martin Piccioni, Executive Director, present via Zoom and unable to unmute in time.
Quinn?
Quinn Stoddard, board staff, present via Zoom.
And as our guests, Melise?
Melise Cunningham, Department of Justice.
And Sherry?
Sherry McPherson, Oregon Society of CPAs via Zoom.
All right, so everybody is here via Zoom today. So now we'll move to review and adoption of the agenda. I need a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Madam Chair, this is Scott Wright. I make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
This is Cynthia Killingsworth. I second.
Thank you. I'd like to call on each of the voting committee members. Chris, with an aye or a nay?
Aye. Chris Dalvig, aye.
Mary?
Mary Savage, yes. Aye.
Scott?
Scott Wright, aye.
Logan?
I think I'm a non-voting member. Is that right, Martin?
Are you a non-voting member? Is he non-voting?
No. I think that was a yes reading lips.
I
We'll
think
see.
so too.
So-
Okay,
So-
Cynthia?
Yes.
Cynthia Killingsworth, I.
Claire?
Claire Costin, aye.
And an aye from myself, Elizabeth Ulmer. So the motion has passed.
Yeah. And just
Is
for
there
the record-
anyone? I'm sorry, Martin.
Sorry, Elizabeth. I have to interrupt for just for
Yes.
the record. I believe you called on Chris Dalvik, and respectfully to Chris. Chris is actually not
Oh!
a voting member.
You
of
are
the
absolutely
committee.
right. Thank you. I apologize.
So
Okay.
I have to reflect that from the record that
Thank you.
know,
Of
since it
course.
will
Of
not be
course.
the official record as a
See,
as a
Chris
recorded
is
voter.
teaching at PSU now, so I just think he's one of us.
Oh, you are. Oh, good for you.
All right. So, yes, thank you for correcting the record on that. Is there anyone present for public comment? All right, then we are going to go ahead and move into our work session. Martin?
Yeah, so I
First
will.
item.
Yeah. So I'll simply do a very brief legislative update because there's a lot that has happened. This committee hasn't met for a while, so there's a lot that's happened legislatively. Some of you have gotten updates, including Mary yesterday because I happened to be in her class yesterday. But just very simply, legislative session has gone splendid. We had a beautiful budget hearing that included a beautiful discussion, even though the bill wasn't in front of Ways and Means at the time, of our accounting scholarship bill. And actually, just yesterday, the tide changed a little bit in our actual work session on both the budget and the accounting scholarship bill were moved up by a week to this upcoming Monday morning. So actually, we are less than one business day away from a work session in Ways and Means, which is great and fantastic news. So those pieces are moving beautifully because also our accounting scholarship bill is now formally in front of Ways and Means because it got through the Education Committee with very appreciated help from our chair here, Dr. Almer. I believe, Logan, you were there to help testify. So that was just a beautiful team effort. We got out of the Senate Education Committee on a unanimous vote. There haven't been any floor votes on this bill, so the process on this bill is a little different because of the subsequent referral to Ways and Means. So our bill will get worked on Monday together with the board's budget that has the funding for it. And that means that's the last kind of really formal, at least subcommittee action. Then it has to be worked in the full committee of Ways and Means next week. And then it goes to both floors. So since it's a Senate bill, it will go to the Senate floor first. And then ultimately, after a little bit of bureaucratic yahoo, it ends up on the House floor for a vote. So we're really close, right? I will certainly update after the work session on Monday, but that's going really well. The other piece is, and that's quite frankly not small news, because as you probably know from whether it's economic forecasts or what's going on with the federal government, right? Every state legislature, including Oregon, is struggling with how to get through the budget cycle because it's kind of unusual, lots of unknowns, right? We are extremely fortunate, and I'll put this on the public record. We are extremely fortunate that we are in a state, which you cannot take for granted, that takes agencies like us, which also means our accounting scholarship bill, and says, oh, these are other fund agencies, meaning fee-based agencies, and we will not treat them the same way as the agencies that are impacted by either income tax revenue or the uncertainties of federal grants or federal revenue that may be, right? So they're essentially segregating us out and saying, we can move those pieces, right? We cannot take that for granted because there's other states around us that essentially punish agencies like us, like in this collective punishment approach, saying if state government is hurting, everybody needs to hurt. We're not in that same place, and we need to thank our lucky stars that that's the case, because that's one of the reasons why I can still come to you today and be optimistic, right? Last piece on the legislative update is our substantive bill that I know many of you are interested in around the licensure pathways. There as well, we've had a fantastic run, wonderful hearings on both sides of the chambers, a unanimous vote in a Senate committee, unanimous vote on the Senate floor. We are unanimously out of the House committee now, and we're about to get a floor vote at some point next week on the House side. It will have to come back to the Senate side one more time for a concurrence vote because there was a one-word amendment on the House side to our bill. So that's the super high-level summary. But essentially, we're looking at a what I think in baseball language, always dangerous for me to try baseball, is a full home run with all bases loaded. So there we go. I tried. I didn't use a soccer analogy.
I'm not good with any sports analogies, but I still think that was spot on. This is really exciting. And I can say from having testified there, it was a thrill to testify. I've never been a part of a government process like that. But it was also a thrill because it's just such a logical argument. It doesn't matter what your political ideology is. This makes sense, which is just such a rare thing, I think, these days. So, okay. So, moving on then to items
Madam
B
Chair?
and yes.
Just as a question, in the testimony, this is Scott Wright, in the testimony for the pipeline bill, was there any discussion of of series of articles of recent, including one in which Logan Steele, our own Logan Steele, was quoted, as far as how accounting is becoming exciting again and enrollments are up by 12%. Was that anywhere in the public discussion of the testimony?
They did not raise that issue. We came
Yeah.
prepared to discuss it, but they did not raise it. And it's pretty easy to counter that when you look at, 70% of CPAs are expected to retire within the next 10 years. You've got some really great, I think that's the statistic. I had it written down, prepared at the hearing. And so, no, it's great that the numbers are up, but we've got a giant hole to fill. So yeah, we were lucky. They didn't ask. We didn't have to bring it up.
But we were ready.
Yeah.
And that was really the important
Yeah.
point. Scott, you're
Well,
right. Money.
Thank you.
And I think I would add one other thing that we can't disregard. The cost of higher education is so burdensome. And to ignore debt load as a reason for individuals leaving public accounting is really missing the boat. I can tell you students who say things to me. My husband will tell you stories of people saying, I can get a 30% raise if I jump into corporate. And I've just got student loans that I've got to pay. And so the economics of this, I think, still makes a lot of sense. So, okay. All right. So anything else before we move on? All right. So we have really two items in this work session today. So touching base on the grant agreement development and then actually the grant agreement rules development. And I think what would be helpful is to go very slightly out of order. Elise, if I can put you on the spot to explain, I just don't want to do it incorrectly, my 10,000-foot explanation, why we need to have the grant agreement rules before we actually do the grant agreement itself.
Sure. Elise Cunningham, DOJ. I think the most practical reason being you need to know what you want to have in your grant agreement and what the terms are going to be. And so that's, as far as just a practical reason. The other reason to have rules is obviously the reason you always, the same reason you want to have rules anytime, which is it's notice to the public about what the terms of those agreements are going to be. Then you also end up making sure that all of the grantees. I know you all are focusing on particularly one, but it has to be for anybody that it's consistently applied.
Great, thank you. I felt that was helpful to thinking about all of this. So the punchline that I was going to share, but was afraid I was going to somehow miss something if I said that, is we have already, Melissa has already drafted the grant agreement rules that was provided to you by Martin. And Martin and I took another pass through it. And I took a pass through it with an eye to looking at whether the items that we as a committee had agreed to in principle regarding this grant agreement have been incorporated into the document. So was there something missing? Was there something that felt that didn't quite hit the mark? So Martin, we have that updated version in front. That's the version you sent out, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what we need to be doing is go through these rules and make sure the entire committee is comfortable with what is included here. So we're looking for making sure there's nothing that's in there that we don't feel is going with the spirit of what the committee wanted, and ensuring that it accurately reflects the spirit of what we have discussed. Once that is done, then the grant agreement can be developed. So Melissa and Martin, is that really in your court then, once we're comfortable with the rules?
As far as
developing the actual grant agreement.
Yes. Yeah. I
So-
already have, I have a sort of an example that I can start from, and then we can make sure that, all the terms that you all want in there are in there. And just, sort of generally, what is in the rules, you aren't necessarily limited only to what is in the rules in your grant agreement. You can have terms that implement what's in your rule that aren't necessarily spelled out in the rule.
Okay. So, Martin, timeline for the grant agreement to be completed. So the committee has an understanding of what our obligation will be and timeline for reviewing it.
So this is a really great question, and it's really important here to distinguish between two things that sound similar but are really not, right? From a timeline perspective, right? So while we can work to develop the grant agreement itself, kind of while we are already exposing the rules for grant agreement, there's really two timelines here, right? One is the timeline for the rules process that we need to have in place, right? And then the second is the timeline for the grant agreement itself, right? And I just want to talk about both and distinguish very clearly between both, right? On the rules side, right? So first of all, first principle is we cannot get to a place where the board can, and Melissa, please stop me here if I'm over, shooting my skis here, because it's a little bit legalistic of an argument, right? But my understanding is that process-wise and legally, the board could not adopt a grant agreement until the rules are actually finalized that provide the framework for the grant agreement. That's my basic understanding, kind of. So the rules have to come first, right? Grant agreement approval at the board level, and quite frankly, also over on the OSCPA side, right? At least at the board level, it could not occur until we have those rules in place, right?
Yeah,
It doesn't
and I would
prevent
say,
us.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, Melissa. Yes.
Oh, I thought you wanted me to respond.
Yeah, no, please.
I would say first step is the bill has to be effective.
Yes, it's overskied. My optimism is there, but yes, you're absolutely right. Right. First, we actually have to have a bill,
and it has to be in effect. So you can't adopt rules or pay out money until that bill is actually law.
So you're being super precise, and that's great. So in Senate Bill 796, so let's be really clear. In Senate Bill 796, we have an effective clause very deliberately inserted of a July 1, 2025 effective date, which is 6 months sooner than if we didn't have kind of an emergency clause, right? That was done deliberately because on the rules timeline, we must have draft rules that are ready to go for the board to vote to expose by the June 5 board meeting. And what that means is that on July 1, which you now know, based on, thank you, Melissa, for the catch, right? On July 1, we can then, the board can vote, pending, passage of the, bill. The bill should be done by June 3, right? But we should be able to have a board vote in June at the June board meeting to say, Martin, get these rules as approved by the board, essentially initiate the rulemaking process on July 1, which is the bill's effective date, right? We can then kick those into gear, the comment process can run, and the final adoption date, comments, rulemaking hearing, whatever, all that can occur at the September board meeting, right? Which means the board then has the option to either immediately adopt, but most likely will simply do an October 1 effective date for those rules, right? Which means that the rules framework should be done by October 1, right? Which then backs up to the question that you asked originally, Elizabeth, right? Which is the timeline for the grant agreement itself. So there is nothing wrong while those rules are exposed for us to actually do the detail work on what the grant agreement looks like, right? But the actual adoption by the board really ideally needs to happen after the vote to do the rules. And ideally, I'm hoping that we can do it all at the same board meeting in September, that we finalize that stuff. If that doesn't happen, we have technically probably another, I would say, month or so just from a timeline perspective, if we're not ready by September with a grant agreement, we could probably afford to do like an end of October thing, but we would then have to do like a special board meeting for adoption of the grant agreement. But I think that from the OSCPA Education Foundation side, and I don't want to get over my skis on that end, right? But my understanding is we need to be able to have that grant agreement in place no later than end of October, early November, to make sure that, you know, everything internally inside the Ed Foundation would be in place, because I'm not allowed to sign off on a small little check that ultimately would have to be written, right? I don't actually sign the check, but I have to do like a document that then causes Daz to write the check. That cannot occur until both the rules and the grant agreements are in place.
Sherry McPherson?
Thank you. And
Question?
Martin, you're spot on with that timing, because, you know, the ideal would be that September. I was just doing a double check on the date, the September 25th board meeting, because that's exactly right. The further, when it starts getting into that October timeframe and then starts pushing, then that's pushing on that timeframe where we would be reaching out to the scholarship applicants, you know, basically querying them and bringing that information in and getting them to apply, et cetera. So, and especially since the Pell piece is a little bit newer to us on that, you know, we're going to want to make sure that we're really, you know, we have that to set up as well.
Yeah.
So.
Melissa, can you confirm, because I know your job is, you know, you're helping us with advice just to kind of stay on the right side of the equation here. And obviously you're not, you know, OSCPA's counsel, right? But I think it's a legitimate question for you, right? Since OSCPA is essentially is essentially a sub-entity, of OSCPA, the Education Foundation, which I think is a separate, I think, what is it, 501c3?
Yes.
501c3, right? We obviously don't, you know, it's a non-governmental entity. I'm assuming it means that if the Ed Foundation, and I think it would actually be best if that could happen, and I'm thinking kind of out loud here, if at some point relatively shortly before the September 25 board meeting, the Ed Foundation could already provide a blessing to the document, so that essentially we know that whatever the board would see in its September 25 packet is actually something where there is an agreement by the Ed Foundation and say, hey, you know, if you do this, because I don't think that there is anything that would prevent the Ed Foundation, since they're not directly bound by, you know, the Senate Bill 796 process and timelines. They could, without getting, I mean, they could, as I understand it, essentially take action on approving a grant agreement on their side before the September 25 board meeting.
Certainly, we could, the board and you know, whoever's the proposed recipient of the grant, can talk about, you know, the agreement and you know, have an agreement in principle about what those terms will be. I would say it shouldn't be executed until after you know, everything is finalized. But certainly you could, there's no reason you can't talk about it and work on it.
So full disclosure, folks, it was important for us in general terms to have this discussion, but here's my full disclosure, right? September 25th is a Thursday, at the risk of stating the obvious. What that really means is, in the context of what Melissa just said and some personally important things for me, is that what I'm hoping is that I can have the board chair on our side execute in an ideal version, if we can get there, if we can get it all done by the September board meeting. We have a board vote to, you know, final adoption of the rules, right? And ideally, right, what I would like to do is have the board chair then also sign off on or authorize me to sign off on the actual, you know, agreement itself, if the agreement is done, right? Which then means that, quite frankly, I need to get this done. My ideal hope is to get the actual agreement done and executed on my end on the 26th. And the reason for that is, so that's the Friday. The reason for that is my last day in the office for 3 weeks because I am taking a break after that meeting. My chair has authorized. So I'm also hoping that, just for that reason, right, that I can get all of this over the finish line on the day of the board meeting and the day after in terms of contract execution. Just want to be clear, and I'm sorry, also to a certain extent selfish, but I also don't want to be the hiccup because of my vacation.
Madam Chair.
Scott?
So this is Scott Wright. Just so make sure I understand all the timelines we've been talking about here. And Martin, you kind of wrapped it up there. So from the OSCPA Foundation side, as long as there is a grant agreement in place, although not necessarily the dollars just at that time, the OSCPA would start the process of collecting up or gathering applications or submitting requests for applications for this scholarship, so that for the September 26th beginning of the academic year, we would have scholarships in place from the foundation available to folks for September of 26. Is that correct?
No, I think that timeline is off, Scott, because it doesn't take into account the scholarship cycles and academic calendars at the universities. My understanding, Sherry, correct me if I'm wrong, is that your team is going to be doing two things prior to the formal agreement being signed. First thing is now I'm really pleased to hear this. That was one of my questions, Melise. Thank you. That we can have an in-principle discussion with sharing the agreement. Both parties are comfortable with the agreement. So once the final approval hits from the Board of Accountancy, the agreement could be executed. So that's first part. Second part is the OSCPA ensuring that their system is ready to handle the different criteria for this scholarship versus the other scholarships. So their standard scholarships are all merit-based. There's not a needs-based component to this. So it is going to require, and I understand that Tana is out right now, but Sherry, maybe you can comment as to your team's ability to do that. Optimally, we want to be sure that your system can accommodate this, I would say, prior to the agreement being signed. And from conversations with Tana, I got the feeling that that wasn't a problem, but maybe you can weigh in on that.
I'm in agreement with you on that timeline, like that work getting done before we hit 9/25. We don't want to have to start things at that point because we want to be ready, frankly, in that, let's just, it's not the exact date, but let's call it that November 1st target, right? Because then we're going through, and as we all know, we start hitting that time period with students being away and holidays and all of that. So we want to make sure that those pieces are moving along. As I may have a little bit of a learning curve at covering some of these things right now in Tana's absence, but we're circling around and that's the plan. At this point, I can't say more, but she's going to be out for a little bit longer. So, but we're working through that. So I don't see a problem. This all seems reasonable.
And Scott, to follow up on the rest of the timeline with this, the universities, with the exception of University of Portland, I don't know about any of the other private schools, but all the public universities are on a quarter system and they start the last week in September.
Right.
So that's both community colleges and the four-year institutions. So the timeline for accessing students to get them to start applying doesn't need to start very early. Typically, most university systems open somewhere. PSU's had some wonkiness. Maybe Logan, you can weigh in from OSU, or Mary from U of O. Our scholarship system generally doesn't open up until January. And so students aren't looking to do scholarships in September for the following academic year. Students are just in time.
Yeah.
So we're fine to push, the scholarship applications need to happen sometime in the late fall, early winter. Scott, you had another question?
Well, yeah, and it's so yeah. Historically, the OSCPA Foundation has announced the scholarships in May for the upcoming academic year, the following September. So am I understanding this to be correct that in May of 2026, the OSCPA Foundation will be able to announce scholarships that are funded by the grant that the Board of Accountancy will be making to them, and then the students will start accessing that money in September of 2026. Does the OSCPA, and this is a question for the OSCPA because we are talking about having the contract in place and everything before the 1st of November, but will the mechanism be in place so that come May of 2026, there will be announcements of scholarships for the dollars that the Board of Accountancy is granting to the foundation? That's really the gist of my question.
The goal that we've talked about all along is those scholarships would be able to be used by the recipients fall of 2026. I mean, that's been the goal.
Yeah.
And with the other timeline we've talked about here, it still fits in within that.
I mean, I don't see why not.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you.
I mean, really, all along, we just had that same pathway, if you will, for when students receive it, which is for the start of the fall term, right? So kind of the difference on this is one side is merit-based, the other side is needs-based.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think another piece of this that's really important that I just want to keep reminding you of, Sherry, is the importance of having a strong outreach plan from the OSCPA. That is concerning to me because, after all this effort, we need to ensure that we have sufficient applicants for these scholarships. And Logan and Mary, I don't know how much visibility you have at your schools, but we're always shocked at how few scholarship applications we see relative to the number of scholarships we have. Claire, you're nodding your head, same thing.
Yeah, same for us.
Yeah, it's so it is really important to think about that. And I'm going to speak for myself, but I'm probably speaking for all the academic members here. I think all of us would be willing to ensure that our universities work hard to try to do this. And, especially I know PSU has a representative on the Ed Foundation, Cass Hauserman. She's so excited about this and wants to help with, lead the marketing efforts. If she's given marketing in a box from the OSCPA, she can champion that on our campus. So I'm hoping that we can get somebody on each campus, either from the Ed Foundation or this committee, to be really championing that. But we do need the OSCPA to be coming up with that collateral for us.
I have a wonderful new membership person that's been with me for 4 months now that has really strong skills. I'm really excited about that and supplementing that with the rest of the folks on our team. And Elizabeth, when we were on site at the career fair the other night, she was on site with us there. So she has had an opportunity to meet Cass, and I look forward to her meeting other folks as well in this process.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on timeline, or are we ready? I think that all makes sense. I felt like that discussion was really necessary. What this says to me is that we really need to have these rules done in the next month by the end of May at the very latest. Am I right, Martin?
That is correct. And quite frankly, I don't know whether it's realistic that we could finish those rules inside today's meeting.
I would love to.
Tells me if we can, that would be great. If it does, fair warning, Madam Chair, that if we get to that place, we're going to have them literally up on the screen saying, this is what we recommend to the board, and actually do a vote on it, right? Because that's a recommendation from the pipeline committee to the board. And I should have probably said earlier that at the February board meeting, there was a specific board action taken to empower this committee, which is not our normal rulemaking committee. We have a laws and rules committee for the board, but there was a very specific intentional board action taken in February that said, we're going to empower the pipeline committee to do this part of the board's rulemaking because it's not integrated with the other rules work of the board, and it is specific to the topic that this committee is really our expert committee on. Right. So the board empowered this committee. What that means is that in our process, right, we need to get to a finalized version of at least what this committee recommends to the board, so that there's clarity on this is what the committee recommends, that then can go into the board packet for the June 5 board meeting. And if you can get to that today, Elizabeth, bless you, and that will be amazing.
Well, that is my goal, and I'm just looking at this. One of the things, okay, there we go. I had to pull up the right version of the draft rules, and I can share that with everyone on the screen, that is. Give me just a second and I will have it up. Okay, so I believe I hope this is the right version. We shall find out. Quinn, could you turn on the sharing for me?
All right, should be good to go.
Great, thank you. Okay, so is this the version you want me to be sharing, Martin, with
Yes.
the questions still in there? Okay,
This is the
perfect.
full transparency with all the comments
Yep.
from Liz and from you, and I think that's the easiest way to get through it.
Got it. Okay. All right. Let me see if I can get everybody on my Zoom screen while I'm doing this, while I have this up as well, so that I can see folks to call on them. It's always, I'll know how that's a little tricky to get everybody, get a screen and get what you need to be seeing folks. Okay. All right. I think we have it. So I don't know if you all have had a chance to read through these rules prior to the meeting. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but what I think I should do first is open it up to see if there are any comments before we walk through the whole document. So if anybody had made comments.
Madam
Okay,
Chair,
sounds like, oh,
Ma-
Scott, go ahead.
just to clarify, when you say comments other than specifics of the contract, just in general, I mean, there's a variety of comments to be made, including trying to answer the questions, but you're talking above and beyond that comments. Is that correct?
Yeah. And then we'll just walk, if there's anything before we just start walking through.
I have nothing. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's just start going through this. I don't know if people prefer that I read each one of these. I don't know. I always wonder about that. I think I'm going to just read through them. So we have to start with the definitions. There's not most of this is pretty clear, except for Melissa's questions here that I didn't have any thoughts really on some of them. So eligible student means an individual who meets the scholarship grant program eligibility requirements, is currently enrolled at an eligible institution, and meets all other eligibility criteria established by rule or under the grant agreement. We define what the institutions are further down. Cost of attendance means the sum of tuition for the number of credit hours per academic term and the cost of books required necessary to complete the course. So Melissa's question is, do you want to include standard fees charged to the student and necessary supplies? I thought more about that after I had sent my first round of comments to Martin. The fees are pretty hefty on students at public universities. So on further reflection, my response would be yes. Is there any opposition to that? And maybe, the other thing is, I guess, Cynthia, you're saying no. Scott?
Well, I guess as a question, just in generally in scholarships, and there's a limitation, are fees included in it? Would this be standard to include fees in part of a scholarship, or is this outside of normal scholarships to include fees? I have no reference point.
I don't know.
My understanding is that scholarships, the money just goes to the student.
If Chair Ulmer, I can address this a little bit, I think. The reason I asked that question is these rules, I looked at actually some rules that HEC, the Higher Education Coordination Commission, has for some scholarship programs that it administers. They did include these fees, and these are because this is a definition of cost of attendance, and cost of attendance is what the student can spend the scholarship funds on. So that's why I asked that. So it's, what can the student spend those scholarship funds for?
That's helpful because that suggests this is a norm for funds coming from some kind of a granting agency.
Yes, and the HEC rule did include those fees. So.
Oh, okay. So we can't.
Cynthia?
Cynthia, are you on mute still?
You're muted.
Did it also say course materials instead of books? Because a lot of our courses, they aren't getting books, they're getting course materials, which is an access code that includes an ebook, but it includes a lot more. So I'm just wondering if maybe we could say books and course materials.
Certainly from the HEC rule did not say that, but that's certainly something you could put in.
That's fantastic, Cynthia. Yes, that's absolutely true because most of our students don't even have hard copy books anymore. They use ebooks. Great. All right, I'm just going to keep moving through each of these and you please jump in and interrupt if there's anything else, if I'm going too fast. Degree program means a program that leads to an associate, baccalaureate, master, professional, or doctorate degree. So we had not talked about these potentially funding doctorates. Melise, is this in here just to be comprehensive, but then we don't need to put that in the agreement? Got it.
If you don't want to fund those, I would take it out of the rule.
Well, that's a conversation. Claire and then Scott.
Hi, Claire Costin. My question would be, in terms of funding doctorate degrees, most of the programs, tuition is already covered by the institution, and then the student receives a stipend for, TA and RA type work. So it would be a scholarship that would cover, I guess, maybe course materials, but since tuition is covered, it seems to me like it's less of an urgency for that to be a part of this. And it would make more sense if I think I would lean towards undergrad, associate, master's degree programs versus doctorate. That's just my opinion. I'm not opposed to it, but it doesn't seem as necessary.
Scott and then Mary.
I think we should drop it because generally speaking, we're trying to fund people to get into the pipeline, and doctorates are more towards the educational side. And the vast majority, I would say, of folks that are going to get a doctorate are not going to end up being in public accounting, which is what this is intended to facilitate.
Mary and then Logan.
Just gonna say exactly what Scott said. So I'm good.
Logan.
And what about post-bac? Is that
That's the professional. But does the
professional?
profession, I assume, Melise, does professional include the post-baccalaureate certificate?
I think it includes what you want it to include. So
how
if that's-
about, may I
yeah.
suggest something?
Mhm.
That it be phrased as master degree or professional certificate, to be clear.
Certainly we can do that.
Okay.
Can I have just a question to back up for a second. I'm not sure I heard a direction on the question about whether you all wanted to include fees or supplies in the cost of attendance.
Sorry, my yes, fees should be included. And I think books and course materials replaces supplies.
Okay.
I mean, there's not really supplies in a, it's not like they're buying chemicals for a chemistry class. So yeah,
Okay.
I think we're fine. I think that's comprehensive. Cynthia?
I was making sure if I was unmuted. We may, forgive me if we already went through this, but a really common thing in a community college is the stacking of degrees or certificates leading to degrees. And so a lot of times students are starting out with the goal of a certificate and they end up with an associate's, but where they may be starting is a certificate. And I'm just wondering, does the degree program and the associate, would that incorporate that type of student?
Do you describe these as a professional certificate? Because in my mind, that's what a accounting clerk is a professional certificate.
Career technical, yeah, why not? That makes sense. Okay, I'm good.
You know, and that's so much, I mean, I don't want to rehash too much, but that was much of what we talked about early on when we were saying the whole idea is get people in this funnel. And I mean, Cynthia sees it. I see it constantly when I review my students' resumes. They started at a community college, they got a certificate, they started working, they came back, they got an associate's, and now they're getting the 4-year degree. That's such a common pattern because that certificate gives them a higher paying job while they go through school. It's a very smart strategy. Okay. Number 4, eligible institution means a post-secondary education institution as defined by Oregon laws. Full-time enrollment means registration and payment of required fees as a full-time student at an eligible institution as defined by the eligible institution. And my understanding, just for everybody's education on this, is that full-time under a quarter system is 12 credits, and that's defined by the Pell Grant status. So the federal government says 12 quarter credits per term is full-time. I don't know what it is on semester. I always mess up that. Is that 8? Claire, or 9? I always forget. Okay. Good standing means eligible student is maintaining satisfactory academic progress as defined by the institution. Grant agreement means an agreement entered into between the Board of Accountancy and a nonprofit organization to administer the scholarship grant program. Grantee means a nonprofit organization that agrees to administer a scholarship program to provide need-based scholarships to eligible students pursuing degrees or certificates in accounting at eligible institutions. Tuition means the amount charged to an eligible student for a course as part of a degree program. Melise, this just makes me think, did you need to include definitions now on books and course materials and fees or anything like that? I'm not a lawyer, but
I don't think so. I think
Okay.
that's pretty regularly understood. And again, like I said, you can put, if you want a little more specificity, you can put that in the grant agreement too.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, number 10 is one that I think we need some input on. Scholarship grant program. What do we want to call this? Floor is open.
I don't have an answer, but I think having CPA in there somewhere would be important. Yeah.
Okay. Sherry, were you
I'll just throw out something to get our juices started. How about that? How about Oregon Board of Accountancy CPA scholarship program?
I'm just going to put notes in here, and then we
I know
can
that's a little long, but trying to give a nod to the Board of Accountancy.
I think we don't need the program. Scott?
Oh, let's just say fill the pipeline, fill the CPA pipeline scholarship program.
I like that.
Wow, there's got to be a joke here about the lack of creativity in a room full of accountants and a lawyer.
I was thinking about we have this phrase, around the office where we say CPAs rock,
because I'm not too creative, I just tried to put it into AI and it said, use your organization name, Pipeline to Accounting. So,
ooh,
Pipeline to Accounting Scholarship Fund. So it could be the Oregon Board of Accountancy Pipeline to Accounting Scholarship Fund.
Or Pipeline to CPA.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
Yes.
What I'm hearing is we don't need this committee. We should just check with AI.
No, we've already edited or AI, Martin, just like right after that.
Okay, so I do just have one question, playing devil's advocate. We know that this is aimed at getting more CPAs, but we also know that students don't oftentimes, particularly disadvantaged students, don't have the confidence to think they can achieve a CPA. So it's baby steps at a time. Are we turning prospective students off by having the word CPA in there? Claire and Cynthia, you both had your hands up relative. I don't know if it's relative to my comment or not.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like a lot of times when I first talk to students who are considering accounting as a major, a CPA is a I don't know, maybe. And once they get further along in the progression in their classes, then okay, yes, I feel comfortable that I'm going to do this, but maybe I'm going to go work in industry, or I don't even know if I'm going to be an accountant. And they're just kind of considering it as a career at the starting point of that major. They don't always know that they want a CPA. And I recognize that professional licensure is the goal here. And I certainly, I talk to students about the, opportunities. And I think as it makes it, as it's easier for students to get licensed and they're not stuck at the 150 is removed, my hope is that will be a little bit less burdensome. But the students who I need to get out into the world and work and support, pay back my loans or support my family or whatever, a CPA sometimes seems, like, do I have to do this, is a question I get from students who are considering accounting. And then by the time they graduate, they want to. So I am a little bit concerned about being I recognize the desire to include CPA in the title, and I'm not opposed to it, but I also think that it does potentially, it might deter some students who would otherwise consider accounting, if that makes any sense at all.
That was really the heart of my question. Scott?
I disagree. The whole concept is to get people to get their CPA. As a matter of fact, later on, we talk about that the applicants must include a statement that they obtain professional licensure in Oregon. It is not an accounting scholarship, other than that's the method to get to a CPA. So I really, if it scares them off to call it a CPA, they're not gonna. This is not the program for them.
Sherry and then Cynthia.
Okay, so I have another thought. Thinking pipeline, in a way, that's our internal speak, right? So what about something like board or BOA or Board of Accountancy path to CPA scholarship, or that's a nod to what Scott was just saying, or Board of Accountancy path to accounting scholarship. I kind of like the CPA piece in there, but it's more about the goal and the desire. From the student's perspective, I always think about getting in other people's shoes, right? As opposed to what we want to do for ourselves.
Cynthia?
I like Sherry's approach. I was going to say something kind of similar, but yeah, I like that approach. But I do recognize, Claire, I agree entirely that what a student comes in thinking that they can accomplish is entirely different from what they do accomplish. And I think that there's going to be a long lag in people's awareness of the fifth year is not the barrier that it was. I still have tax students that think that they can write off their dependents. So, it takes years for this perception to go away in the public. So I think anytime you put a CPA on it, everyone's like, oh yeah, I need that fifth year, or I need to do all these additional things. So I do worry about the CPA, but I could live with it too.
Okay. Oops.
Go ahead, Sherry.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, this one takes longer to lift my little hand up there. Okay, so here's a thought, right? So we need something for today. So I'm just going to throw this idea. BOA, path to accounting scholarship. What we're talking about here is these are in the rules. So as we find that we end up with some, let's just call it some aging in the program, right? We come along and what we give away for scholarships may not look the same. Let's just say 5 years from now. Maybe that's where we could go back and a rule change. We change it from accounting to CPA. I mean, I'm just kind of throwing that out there. I mean, I work for CPAs, so I think about CPAs first, right? But I want to recognize what we're talking about as well. But I do kind of like the path because the path is sort of something that we can move forward with. You know, it's sort of some energy and motion and direction.
It sounds like we're hearing some consensus around people feeling most comfortable with Oregon Board of Accountancy path to CPA. That word path is pretty powerful in shifting the narrative on this. Any objections to, I'm going to keep us, I want to get us done in the next hour. Any objection to moving forward with this? And if somebody comes up with a fabulous suggestion, I believe they are welcome to email it to Martin, who can then share it with the group, right?
And remember, we're in the draft stage. This is what we're
Right.
bringing to the board, and there's still comments on the rules. There's still time for us to deal with this stuff. Nothing is actually final until board adoption on September 25th. So I think the reference point for us here is that while it's true that we need to agree on a text that we bring to the board, it doesn't mean that we're pouring absolute concrete. It means we're comfortable with that as a starting point.
I think this feels like a very, I'm watching everybody's faces. This feels like it's the most comfortable.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going. All right, we're now in the grant requirements. So we had discussed $1 million, right? That's how the number, I don't believe there's any reason to be changing that, right, Martin?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so under grant requirements, the Board of Accountancy may make grants up to $1 million to one or more nonprofit entities to be used to provide need-based scholarships to eligible students seeking higher education in accounting at eligible institutions. The grantee and the board may enter into a grant agreement specifying the amount of the grant and other terms, including any administrative costs that may be retained by the grantee, along with other requirements specified by the board. So we had discussed there would be an administrative fee. That's obviously step 2 in the agreement. This just gives us authorization for that. Step 3, grantees must disperse funds to eligible students within a time specified by the board. Grantees may not disperse scholarship funds except pursuant to the grant terms and these administrative rules. If a grantee disperses scholarship funds to an ineligible student or otherwise uses funds in a manner not authorized by the grant agreement or the rules, the grantee must reimburse the board the full amount of those funds. 5, grantees must return any unused funds to the board within a time specified in any grant agreement. We haven't discussed that, but that obviously is the next document. So I understand, Melise, that this just is laying the framework for the actual agreement. Each grantee must maintain sufficient records to document its activities related to the scholarship grant program. Additional record-keeping requirement may be specified by the board in the grant agreement. And that's something that we did early on, discuss in some depth, the need for additional reporting so that we can report back some metrics of what has been achieved by this grant program. So the bulk of that relates to demographic and need-based data. Upon request of the board, each grantee must make its academic and financial records related to the scholarship program available for review by the board or its designee and must retain those records for each award for not less than 3 years after the scholarship funds are awarded to a student. I have no idea here, Melise. I mean, or does anybody else have any other thoughts on this? You asked how long you want it to be.
Yes, just so you know, that rule that I was looking at, that was a HEC rule, they used 3 years. And so I just kept that, but just wanted to know if you all wanted it to be longer or shorter.
Okay. Seeing no comments, we'll keep moving to eligible students. An eligible student is one enrolled at an eligible institution. Okay, this is, so I want, there's, Melise had asked if there were any other eligibility criteria, so keep that in mind as we're looking through what is currently here. Is currently enrolled in classes totaling at least 6 credit hours per term. So because HEC is just dealing with public institutions on a quarter system, this needs to be specified in quarter and semester hours. So anything related to, and I think I rambled a bit on that. So that does need to be specified. But I have a question for the committee, which is, What are we looking for? Are we willing to give scholarships to students who are enrolled in just one class at 4 quarter credit hours? Because the 6 is 2 classes on a semester system. All the accounting classes are 4 quarter credits. What is the intent of the committee here? I don't recall real clear discussions about this.
I think Cynthia has her hand up. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Cynthia.
Correct me wrong. I think we did discuss this and we were concerned about people getting a large scholarship for taking one class. And
Right.
let me know if other people remember this, but I think we settled on this as a way to mitigate that.
6 quarter credits? Because that's only one accounting class. They would have something else maybe. I mean, we all offer these little 2 credit classes. So was the question that we want them to have, I think maybe it's easier for us to think in terms of number of classes. So are we looking for students to be?
We still have 3 credit classes. So the idea was, I think that we have 3 and 4 credit classes. They would have to take at least 2 classes to get up to the 6 credits unless they were taking a large class, right?
Thank you. I thought all your classes were 4. Ours are 4.
There's a few that are still 3.
Okay, that explains it. I was really puzzled by the 6. Claire?
So just earlier in the language, I just did a Command F for the word full, and there's a definition of full-time when we talk about the maximum amount to be granted to students who are, to full-time students. So if we are, and I'm not opposed to this at all, but I just want to make sure, and this is maybe a question for Melise, is that if we are defining full-time students and we're talking about the amount for full-time students, and then here we're talking about the requirement being that they be basically part-time enrolled, because 6 credit hours, semester credit hours is not full-time enrollment. Do we need to include additional language around that? Or is there any, why do we have full-time students? Does that make, because it seems to me, it feels like a disconnect in that we're talking about full-time students. And then in the eligibility requirements, we have nothing about them being full-time students.
Yes. The reason that we have a definition for full-time student is because of the later rule that talks about the maximum amount that can be awarded. And whereas this is a minimum requirement. So I think they're a little bit 2 different things. And I guess I'm not sure how how much further I can explain that, but if you, certainly if you want to define part-time and say here, you could define part-time, and you could say here in this rule is currently enrolled in classes at least part-time or full-time, and then you'd have both definitions.
Because yeah,
you could do it either way.
The problem with part-time is part-time could be 1 course. So I actually, now that Cynthia refreshed my memory on that with the 3 credits, and Claire, 6 credits would be 2 classes for you guys, right? Yeah, I think then this language is actually just fine. I think that was all me going off in a bad direction. So I think we're good.
You could also say at least 6 credits or 2 classes per term.
No, because it could be somebody could come in and find 2 credit classes. I like the 6 credit hours per term. And given the fact that the way this works, I think, so then is a question, do we need to define quarter versus semester credits? It would be 6 under both, but should we say something in there?
I think it would be a good idea.
6 quarter or semester hour?
Claire has her hand up.
Yeah. Claire?
Yeah, sorry, just a quick question. And this is me trying to refresh my memory. Is this specifically that they have to have this many accounting classes, or is it any classes that they're taking. We're not specifying. So when you said they might just be taking one accounting class, they don't have to be in any accounting classes. They could be taking sciences or whatever they need to fulfill requirements to get to their degree, and that would qualify.
Yep.
Okay, great.
As long as they're pursuing an accounting degree or certificate. Yep. Okay, and Chris, are you guys on a quarter or a semester?
We're on semesters at
Okay, so
Lithia.
and then this works with you guys as well?
Mhm.
Okay, cool. Let's just
So-
move on then.
So, Melissa, does this give you any heartburn from a legal perspective? Because there's really two different standards here, right? Because 6 quarter hours is not the same as 6 semester hours. So I'm just a little worried about this because we're kind of saying, you know, in one place it's 6 semester hours, which is a different level than 6 quarter hours. So are we
6 quarter is 4 semester, right?
exactly? So can we just specify? Does
Sure.
that work for the committee that it's 4 semester hours? Because then it doesn't look like we're treating people in either a quarter or semester place with a different standard.
Claire?
So then that is one course would be the requirement, because 4 semester hours would be one class plus a credit somewhere. It would be
Do
6
you-
6 semester, 8 quarter would be 2 classes, right?
Right, but what I'm saying is we want more than one course, but not assuming that these are, like in a quarter system, we have these 2 and 3 credit classes. So 6 translates into 4 on a semester system, right? Am I doing that right? My math
Yeah.
right? Help me someone. It's been a really long time since I've taught on a semester system.
But
Mary?
for semester hours, one class, aren't the semester classes listed in 4 credits?
How many, aren't they 3? They're 3. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's one class plus something on both systems. That's what I was trying to get to. Chris, am I interpreting this right on semester?
I think that the total per year ends up being the same. So if you're in 6 credit hours per quarter versus
No.
semester,
No, because 150 versus 225. Think about it from that perspective. So on a quarter system, you need 225 for the 5th year. On a semester system, you need 150 for a 5th year.
so it would be
So it's
18 and 12 if we multiplied 3 quarters versus 2 semesters, which is the 150 and 225, right?
yeah. So we're doing this right, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Sorry.
maybe Melissa, check on this before you put it in stone, okay? I want to keep us moving through. I'm mindful we have less than an hour left. I have a very hard stop at 11.
Yes, absolutely. And so just to clarify, you would like it to say at least 6 quarter or 4 semester credit hours? Okay.
Correct. The idea is we've got to do a little more than one standard class.
And
So-
you all are much more the experts in this area than I am. So I absolutely, I can certainly look something up, but yeah.
Yeah, I think we're right on that. You are always welcome to circle back to me, Melissa, if you want me to look at that more. Okay, demonstrates financial need under the same standard as is required for federal Pell Grant eligibility, Oregon Opportunity Grant eligibility, or as otherwise required under scholarship award agreement entered into by the student and the grantee. Let me explain this to everybody. So Oregon Opportunity Grants is the Oregon specific program for students who are ineligible for Pell Grants due to their immigration status. So Oregon Opportunity Grants are a needs-based. And then I'm not aware of anything else that would be used, but this piece of it provides some additional latitude to the granting organization if they decide there's some other way they want to determine financial need. Claire?
I think that that's important language to have, especially given the current state of the world that we live in, and who knows in 2 weeks or 2 months or however long what the requirements for Pell Grant eligibility will be,
Right.
if there are even
Right.
Pell Grants. We don't know.
Right.
So, and I don't know at what point will they say Oregon can no longer give the opportunity grant for what, you know,
Right.
we don't know. So I think that whatever we can give to provide a lot of latitude for the granting organization to be able to work with the student, it's crucial, just because I think that if we leave any federal or even state, if that's our only standard, I could see that changing instantly, and then this, you know, is thrown out. So I want to make sure that the language is super clear that allows for the OSCPA Foundation to have that freedom.
Bless you, Claire.
Yeah. That was, okay, so we're good on that. The next one is pursuing classes as part of a degree program towards a degree or certificate in accounting with intent to obtain professional accounting licensure in Oregon. I think that's good. Next point I think of discussion here is in good standing at the eligible institution and maintains at least a 2.0 grade point average or the required average determined by the grantee in all accounting and business courses. So I put a comment in here. My recommendation is to raise this to 2.5. I do understand this is a floor, however, in here. The agreement itself could be more strict and have something like a 2.5 or a 2.8, which is a B- average. When I first read this, I thought, I don't want any money to go into somebody who only has a 2.0 grade point average, because that's an extreme, that means they're not passing some classes probably. Claire?
Actually, I think Cynthia had her hand up first.
Oh, sorry, Cynthia.
Just a clarification, overall grade point average, not specific to a term. Okay.
Yeah, because they're likely too early, some of them, to even have an accounting. So it would be a cumulative. Claire?
So then, to be clear, this is not going to be available to folks in maybe in their first year of of their college career, if it's specific to their accounting and business courses. So if they come in and when their very first year if they're not eligible, that's fine, but they may not have accounting or business courses to have a grade point average. So that's all I'm getting at.
They might not have any classes. That's a great point.
Or that's true. If they're coming in at the very beginning, then they would have high school GPA versus college.
Yeah. We're not specifying which GPA it is. Scott?
Well, and maybe that's point is, so I think we were talking about funding folks from their freshman year through. So how would a freshman then therefore qualify under this particular eligibility standard?
Would you like me to? I have some.
Yeah, Melise.
So this is defining an eligible student, which is all of the things that need to happen while the student is enrolled in the eligible institution and receiving the scholarship. So it says and maintains at least this GPA. This is the requirement while they are receiving the scholarship.
Great. So then in terms of if we want to specify anything, and again, I think we have a line to walk here between micromanaging the grantee organization and ensuring the goals of the committee are met. So if we wanted to say something about a required minimum GPA in the grant agreement, could we do that?
Yes.
For applicants.
For applicants, yes, and I think in the later rules we have information, about the application and selection process.
Okay,
you could put that there, and so this rule is really about what happens while they are receiving the scholarship, too.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Mary.
Well, if they have to maintain, I mean, a 2.0 is pretty darn low for even maintaining. Don't we want that a little bit higher?
I'm most comfortable with 2.5. That's saying B's and C's.
That's minimum.
Yeah, as a minimum, at least. I mean, if a student drops below a 2.5, I'm very concerned.
Yeah, I would agree.
Scott?
Well, again, these are the base level requirements. Our agreement with the foundation can have 2.5. It could have 3. It could have 4. But this is the
And
base level.
I just realized something, and Logan, you can probably weigh in better than me. If a student has a 2.0 GPA, they're not in good standing at the institution.
Yep.
So I think that makes it a say, if we do a 2 point, I mean, I think it just doesn't matter. They have to be in good standing, and we can deal with a higher GPA later, or we can just raise this to a 2.5. I mean, I am concerned if a student drops below a 2.5, they'll still be in good standing. I think the number is 2.2, Logan. I don't remember exactly, but
I'd
I
have to
think
look
it's
it up.
right about, it's below a 2.5 to lose your good standing. Do I hear objections to raising it to 2.5?
Absolutely not. I'm uncomfortable.
Okay, then let's raise it to
No.
2.5.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, residency. So Melissa had asked, that she didn't recall if we discussed it. I thought it seemed reasonable. For a student to be eligible for a scholarship under the scholarship grant program, the student must be a citizen. And eligible non-citizen defined by the federal regulations as amended and be a resident of the state of Oregon. Now, given Claire's comment, I'm a little concerned about this. I mean, this is the question is, do you want these going to international students? I think that's what this is about, is preventing international students who are here on international student visas. But does this inadvertently potentially exclude, for example, DACA students or undocumented students? Because DACA students are hired by employers currently. International students rarely get a visa. I'm waiting. I think this is a Melissa question.
Yeah, and I don't know, because this is not my area of expertise. I certainly could find out. This is what I copied from the HEC rule.
Okay, I'm just going to put a note in here. Follow up to ensure language doesn't exclude students who are undocumented. This should exclude
Quite frankly, folks, given the comments earlier about the world that we live in, and I certainly won't specify what we mean by that, this might very well be one of those times where we may have to do some tinkering at the September board meeting at the final rule level, because we may know a lot more by then about how the picture has evolved there.
Yeah, agreed.
Elizabeth,
Sherry, I see your hand up. Oh, I'm sorry, Cynthia, then Sherry.
Yeah.
Can you be legally a resident of the state of Oregon and be an international student?
Oh, great question. Melissa?
I
think
believe
that's a
you
no.
can.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I
I was going to say that would be a nice fix right there if you just
Right,
took out
because
number one.
resident means you just live here.
Yeah. Having been one, I would think the answer is yes.
No Californians get this money. I mean, that's on it. I mean, I think that's a fair thing because it's Oregon CPAs that paid the fees. We want to make sure that Oregon residents are the ones who get the scholarships. I think that's a very fair statement.
Yeah.
All right, Sherry?
Thank you. Just thinking about this and all of the comments before, I'll throw this out. What would happen if we kept number 2? We took out number 1. Think about putting number 1 in the agreement as opposed to in the rules. For the Ed Foundation, we specify that students need to be going to specific universities. So there is an exception for a carve-out for a Washington University that's in Vancouver, but otherwise we specify their Oregon universities. thinking it, and that's kind of tightening that down about the Oregon fees, right? But maybe we don't have to be so specific here if it's covered in the grant agreement.
Okay, I'm just going to make a note of that because I think this is something that probably Melise needs to follow up on.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the one thing too, be a resident of state of Oregon, but unless we're very specific someplace about where those funds can go, somebody could be in Oregon and yet using their funds, let's just say as a remote student, way East Coast or someplace else with not really an intention to stay in Oregon and hopefully affect the pipeline.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's spot on. I have a student, Logan, who's moving out of state for family reasons, but gets messed up with the semester versus quarter, and she's finishing her degree at Oregon State Online. And so she shouldn't be. Yeah, we were thrilled when we realized that she could do this at in-state rates. It was great. I was happy to help her figure that out. So yeah, I think all of this is devil's in the details. We're trying to get to our intent here. Okay, this was great. Is there
one more thing? I think you might check the Oregon residency rules. There is a lot of rules about you need to be reliant on Oregon financial sources and so on. So it may get you where you want, not needing the federal. But just take a look at that. I was looking at both the tax rules and then the financial aid rules for that, and it looks like it might get you what you need.
That's great. Okay, I left that note there for you, Melise. So that should help you get through that. Melise had asked the question at the very beginning of this section, are there any other eligibility criteria that we want to include? I feel like nothing's come to mind. We've tried to put some omnibus language in there, some things shift at the national level. Okay, great. I'm going to hit that as a resolve then. Okay, boy, you're getting a messy document. This looks like old school work papers in public accounting. Okay, when you get reviewed. All right, application selection process. Let's see, what is the question here? Okay. Okay, I've added in, this is just to get the Oregon process. Applicants for a scholarship under the scholarship grant program must complete and submit the free application for federal financial student aid. We've added in the alternative process, but I also think we need something else in here, again, to mirror the language above, something about or equivalent. If all this stuff goes away. I mean, I agree. We don't know what process could go away. The PCAOB is probably going away in the next year. So, we don't know. So add in language similar to above for alternative process. Does that make sense, leaving that for you, Melise? Okay. All right. Applicants must submit a scholarship application form as specified by the grantee that includes a statement that the eligible student intends to obtain professional accounting licensure in Oregon. Awesome. Applications must be filed during the time frame established by the grantee. Selection of scholarship recipients must be based on a first come, first served basis determined by the receipt date of the FAFSA. I need some help. I think that, Melise, I didn't understand that at the time, but I think that that is the HEC program, which this relates, that's in there, I believe, because of the Oregon Promise. Oregon Promise has always been first come, first serve. So I don't think that's the right language for in here.
And that was my question. You could do it on this basis. You could do it on, most greatest need. You could do it on, there's any number of ways that you could structure it.
Thoughts from the committee, Scott?
So we have a prescriptive selection of scholarship recipients must be based. And now we're talking about what that be, but do we want to lessen that so that we can have some flexibility in the agreement with the foundation, dropping the prescriptive must to something a little less prescriptive?
What would that language be, Louise?
I would change
May?
must to may.
Maybe based on financial need.
Right.
I'm worried about making this too specific because I do think we need some flexibility there. But I think we could, at the level of rule, say something like, if you want to retain the must, simply must be based on financial need, but then leave it up to the grantee as to what that looks like. That could be one way.
Okay, so selection of scholarship recipients may be based on financial need or other criteria. Do we want it that broad, or should I get rid of the or other criteria?
Well, it
Scott,
does
I don't know
have
if
to
that's
be,
a hanging out.
yeah, it's going to be statutorily, it has to be needs-based.
Yes.
Got
So,
it.
so that is a must. The other, sort of like, how do you, if you get 1,000 applications, how do you determine who gets funded first? Was kind of the idea of this.
Scott?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, I saw your hand. I wasn't sure that was an old
I
hand.
forgot.
So, Melissa, are you saying we have to have the must in there?
No, I was saying you do have to have the must if you're gonna say, if you're just gonna substitute needs-based, because that's a definite requirement. That's gonna be in the statute.
Yes.
This is really more, how do you prioritize? And if you don't want to specify that, that's fine. I just put that it's in here for in case that's something that you
And
want.
Elizabeth Logan has his
Yeah.
hands up.
Yes, Logan.
So can we conceptualize this as there's like you must have need, right?
Mhm.
Are we then gonna rank people on need thereafter? Or is it just like a yes or no? And then if it's a yes or no, then how do we sort people
Yeah.
that
And
are a
quite
yes?
Yes. And we don't have to make that choice. Really, the fundamental policy choice for this committee is, do we want to specify in rule how that should be ranked, or do we leave it up to the to the grantee, right? And I'm kind of leaning more toward, hey, it needs to be needs-based, but leave it up to the grantee how they sort that out.
Yeah, I've been in those meetings a lot, and I think you need to have some flexibility. So does that mean eliminate this whole section?
I was gonna, oh, sorry, Scott, I don't know if yours
That-
was before mine. or
That was,
not.
well, actually, that's a Melise question. Do we eliminate this if that's what we want?
You could, or we could change it to say selection, or prioritization, must, maybe based on criterias determined by the grantee. Or according to the grant agreement. Either one.
I like that. Selection of scholarship recipients must be based on criteria included in the grant agreement. Scott?
Yep, I was just gonna leave the flexibility, the grant agreement come up with it, not necessarily leaving it with the grantee, i.e. the foundation, but we'll develop the agreement that describes the eligibility, yes.
Yeah, I mean, in a crazy world, in 4 years, perhaps, the governor here wanted this as a diversification of the pipeline. Perhaps in a crazy world, in 4 years, it could be diversity characteristics. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there saying, we don't know what the future holds. We've never had this much uncertainty. Okay. All right, awarding must continue until all available funds have been awarded for the academic year. Good?
I have a question on that. So we basically, this is Scott Wright, we say that we're going to grant the $1 million earlier. Is when we say all funds available have been awarded for the academic year, is that going to be as described by the granting agreement?
Oh, great question.
Or is that saying all $1 million must be spent in the first year?
Melise, this might be, again, a holdover from starting with the HEC language because they allocate that year by year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I think that.
So okay. Sherry?
I was going to say, I would ask if possible to take this out. Let's leave that in the grant agreement, because otherwise that could hold the, in this case, the foundation to a point of continuous awarding, right? Like all of a sudden we're dribbling something out and that could change the whole scope of things. I would rather that we have this in the agreement and have it a little bit more flexible.
Yeah, I think if we leave 5 in there, it's somewhat inconsistent with what I've heard from this committee before.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pull that out. Sorry, I froze, so I took off my video for a moment.
I could see that would be
Okay.
like the Oregon Promise too. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Scholarship amounts. Scholarships awarded to eligible students may be in an amount up to the cost of attendance at eligible institution. Cost of attendance as defined by this agreement. Because there is a cost of attendance that's different that universities have that include living expenses.
Yeah, that's why we defined
Great.
it.
Perfect. For full-time students, but no more than 5,000 per student per academic year at a university and 3,000 at a community college. So what is the committee's feeling on this?
So this
We
is Scott
capture
Wright, Madam Chair. So my question would be, does this allow a situation where a person is less than full-time, but they could get as much as a full-time or $5,000 a year if they're in the university? Again, should it be a little more, could be as much as, but subject to as the terms of the granting agreement?
I think it covers it up to. So if you say up to, I don't think that precludes doing less. Claire?
So I had the exact same question and thinking about cost of attendance at institutions varying. So is it possible that a student at an institution where they're taking 6 hours, $5,000 would still not cover full? I mean, I don't know, but to Scott's point, that's why I was asking about part-time versus full-time. And we have, full-time is defined and we say they have to have at least 6 hours or whatever we came up with earlier. But do we need to consider that full-time students would be eligible for the, the full amount, and then students who are not full-time would only does that need to be like 2,500 and 1,500, or do we need to have some kind of a specific language in there such that, students who are at institutions where 6 hours might get them closer to $5,000 can't receive the full 5,000 because they're not full-time students? I had that same question, I think, is what Scott was asking as well.
Cynthia?
Is this something, I mean, we're hitting the broad points with this, but is this something that could be refined by the agreement?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Up to the cost of attendance at the so could we just change this to scholarships awarded, because this language again was intended for public institutions. Scholarships awarded to eligible students may be an amount as specified in the grant agreement.
You could do that. I think it would be, my recommendation would be that you put something in the rules about the maximum amounts.
Then as long as, because that's a ceiling, as long as that ceiling isn't too low or too high. If that ceiling is the number we're talking about, which I believe it is, that's the number we've talked about in here. Then we can put more details of guidance in the agreement. And again, the other thing to think about is we don't know how many applications there's going to be. So we do want to leave.
And just to be clear, let's see. The prior rules, let's see. And maybe we need to just put it in, specify further in the prior rule about grant requirements or eligible students. But the idea when I was crafting is the scholarship is for the cost of attendance. So it's not going to be intended to be more than the tuition fees and books, or course materials.
Right. At a
Whatever
private
that
school,
number is.
Yeah, but a private school, it could be more. So we're capping it for private schools is basically what this is doing. It's not going to be more than 5,000. I mean, perhaps a few dollars more at any public school, but the 5 and the 3 are the round number of the cost of one term at the public university, public institution. Okay, are we okay to move on from that one, or is there some modification needed? I've gotten lost. Because again, this is just the ceiling. I think we're okay on this, right?
Did you want the part-time specified, or?
What I would propose is I just did this, is to take out for full-time students. So then it would read, maybe an amount up to the cost of attendance at the eligible institution, but no more than 5,000 per student, etc.
Yeah, that's
I
helpful.
think that addresses it.
Okay.
Okay. Conditions of award. We have 20 minutes.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
So earlier we had the discussion is why did we have a definition of full-time student in our definition piece? It was simply there, as I understood, it was simply there to explain what was now being used in scholarship amounts. Should we go back and eliminate the definition of full-time student in the definition since it isn't being used anyplace else?
Yes, I would definitely do that. We don't need to define terms that aren't used.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, I'm making everybody dizzy. I know how bad that is when you scroll. Okay, condition of award, except as provided in section 3 below, the maximum period of scholarship eligibility for eligible students may not exceed 8 academic years or quarters. What do we want on this, folks? Scott?
This is more a matter of procedure, except as provided in section 3 below. There is no section 3.
Ah. Okay.
But we're also going from 1 to 5. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's the same place.
It's because we're in track change mode. When you accept changes, it fixes it.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, this is a legal piece that probably needs to be here. Is there a reason? I mean, 8 academic years, even the slowest student, it's unusual to exceed 8 years. It's unusual. It's not unheard of, but it's unusual.
I
Can
think
we
you have
just
to put
stop at
a perimeter around someplace.
Yeah. I think just 8 academic years, period. Any reason to do anything else?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I don't know. 8 seems far too long. If we're trying to fill the pipeline, waiting for them to get 8 years through the program is not the target, in my opinion.
Well, I will tell you that if you're talking about somebody starting fresh as a freshman, the majority of students don't get through in less than 5 years. If you're talking about economically disadvantaged students, it's probably 6 is your mode. So given that,
I would be, given that, I'd be comfortable with 6, but again, if the concept is, and if the board's approach, I think I understood the board's approach is they wanted to get this started and moving as fast as possible.
Yeah.
To get the pipeline filled, to make it 8 years is just counter what we want to accomplish.
Yeah, I can see 6, especially given that we don't have a 5th year, or we expect to not have a 5th year requirement. Any objections to going to 6? I see your point, Scott. Okay. Number 2, students whose legitimate need to exceed the time limitations in section 1 of this rule or to attend school for less than 6 credit hours per term may be eligible to receive a scholarship. Okay. I mean, it's kind of just, all right, it's hopefully we don't have to use these exceptions. It's May, so we good with that? Again, I don't want to micromanage the grantee.
Just one brief point on item 2 on the conditions of award. Does this need to be aligned with the language thing we did earlier
Yeah.
on the 6 quarter hours and the semester hour piece? Is that the same
Could
kind of the same thing that we had to do there?
I had that, yeah.
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah, we would
Okay.
make those
Okay.
consistent.
Okay, number 4, which will turn into number 3. A scholarship award may not be made to any student failing to maintain the required GPA, or who fails to maintain good standing. Yep. And at least I'm not messing with the numbers. You'll figure all that out. An eligible student may apply for renewal of a scholarship on an annual basis until the student has received funding for the maximum period of scholarship eligibility. Yep, we've talked about that. Grantee reporting requirements. Grantees receiving a scholarship grant must collect data and other information as specified by the Board of Accountancy related to the scholarship grant program and report that information to the board annually or as otherwise specified in the grant agreement. We've talked about the importance of that. The grantee must collect and report to the board scholarship recipient information, including eligible institution attended by the student, enrollment status and amount of scholarship grant program funds dispersed to each eligible student, the basis used to determine the financial needs, such as Pell Grant or Oregon Opportunity Grant status, such as, we should be fine with that. Each scholarship recipient's self-reported gender, race, ethnicity to the extent voluntarily provided by the student. Each scholarship recipient's grade point average in all accounting and business courses. So this is interesting. So this is, we've switched now on GPA to just accounting and business. And I think that's appropriate, but I just wanted to call that out. Seeing no objections or comments. Each scholarship recipient's academic level and total credits earned, whether the scholarship recipient is in good standing, whether the scholarship recipient receives any other need-based or financial aid, and any other information specified by the board. It shouldn't be board, should it? Oh yeah, I guess it should be. Yeah.
Yes.
That just
'Cause
allows
that's
us
what
to
you
add
can
a
put
new
in
one.
the agreement.
Yep. In addition to reporting required under section 2 of this rule, grantees must collect and provide demographic information. Why are we doing this?
Is that part of HEC?
Right, but then you've got demographic down here.
Right.
It seems redundant.
This is what the committee discussed.
Right, but I think
Oh,
that's demographic, so it goes further down. Scott?
Well, I guess that's they have things such as, for example, military status, disability. Those were things we talked about in the past. If we're talking about the diversification of the profession, it was more than just ethnicity and gender.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So that's why I think that's what I was reading. All these extra pieces there were things that we added beyond just ethnicity and gender.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
we need to take
I
the
feel that.
simply
Go ahead.
out.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Martin.
I think we just need to take out what's currently the D on
I think you're right.
on this piece because we have it covered in detail below in accordance with, you know, Scott's points and what we previously worked on in this committee. And then I think
So
problem.
something just dawned on me. We had really, Scott, did you still have a question?
Oh, no, again, sorry.
Okay, we had a couple of really robust conversations around how do we demonstrate the effectiveness of this program. And we talked about how we can look at the data reported by the grantee organization and compare that to the populations at our schools. Is there anything reason why we might want to know the demographic and other information about the applicants versus recipients? And here's the reason why I ask. When we are doing searches, we always get questions at PSU about what our applicant pool looks like and who we choose, because they're concerned about bias in the hiring process. So should we be asking something here? Should we be asking on this demographic information about applicant pool? Wait a minute.
So if I may,
I'm sorry, it's right there.
It's in there.
it's in there. Yeah. It's also
Okay.
critical that we do
Applicant
this
and
because the
grantee.
governor's office will want it.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. Okay. Folks, that's the end.
Okay, I do have a question.
Yes.
Let's see, and it was back to, the funds going to the student. So for Ed Foundation, we send those funds to the school. We don't.
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
So I want to make sure that we're clear on that that we don't.
Where is that? Which section is that?
It was tweaking me before we got to this grantee reporting, like conditions of award. I'm trying
So
to
your
find.
question is, should there be something in here about this right here? Should there be something about the fact that the awards go through the universities and colleges?
Yeah, there was something in here about. I'm trying to find it in here. We were kind of moving and I didn't want to interrupt.
Okay. While you
but-
look for that, Chris, did you have a comment?
Just a general comment as the board discusses credit hours, it is, according to federal financial aid, a full-time student at both semester and quarter institutions is 12 credits, and half-time for both institutions is 6.
Oh, okay. Wow. That might be the way, Heck was only writing for quarter systems. That is super useful. Okay, so I think that's something then that, Melise, maybe you can just make, in the interest of time, you can make a note of that. Maybe everything just goes back to 6 quarter hours. Because if that's tied to federal financial aid, or 6 credit hours with no quarter or semester.
Certainly
So that's 2 classes. But I mean, I think that, notwithstanding uncertainty about the future, I mean, our guiding principles on everything flow from federal financial aid requirements.
Madam Chair, in the interest of time and to kind of make this really easy for you and the committee, if you feel like we are through this document, one of the things we could do is, because there's clearly comments still in the document and kind of a little bit of editing, but really at the core in terms of the policy stuff, I feel like we're where we need to be with respect to this meeting. So what you could do is you could call for a motion to allow the chair to essentially present a final recommendation product to the board based on what we just saw and based on basically what we had on screen, so that we can clean up the comments and the language things. But essentially the committee would make a recommendation, would basically empower you as the chair to present a version of what we just had on the screen that reflects the input that we got today.
Okay. Scott?
But a question first before that. So are we envisioning that we would visualize, this committee would get a chance to get back and read what is going to be presented?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we just can't discuss it on email. The piece that we cannot do is after this committee meeting, send it out. I can send it out, but I will send it out as a, please do not do a reply all, because we cannot be discussing it on email, because then we have a public meeting outside of email.
But if somebody has a comment based on the read of the final draft, we'll send out a red line, basically.
Exactly.
And then they can reply to you directly.
They can give if someone has a concern, they can reply to me so that I know ahead of the board meeting that there is a concern, but that concern needs to come to just me. I can see I may be able to share it with Elizabeth ahead of time, right? But we cannot have an email discussion amongst the group.
Right. Okay, let me finish up with Scott and then to Sherry.
Well, I was gonna make a motion. So Madam Chair, this is Scott Wright. I make a,
Hang on, let's get Sherry in there because I think
Okay.
Sherry's got her.
I'm going to go really fast. So I just want to make sure that that item 4 under the scholarship amounts is clear that the students, where it says student has received funding, that it's, you know, that we recognize that that might be itchy language, that it's the university or the college that's received the funding on behalf of the student or for
Which
the
section
student.
is that in, Sherry?
It's under scholarship amounts, item 4,
Okay.
right before that grantee. So anyway, I'll just throw the thought out there about how it.
Scholarship, so it says scholarships awarded to eligible students.
Yeah, yes, it says an eligible student may apply, blah, 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 until the student has received funding for the maximum. I want to make sure that we understand that we're not sending that funding directly to the student,
Got it.
that they could use for anything.
Okay. Let me just make a note of that.
If I could have one clarifying question too. So I'm not sure if you all just decided to go back to the at least 6 credit hours per term or not.
I
I
think
think the question is for you. That's the question for you.
based on what Chris found out about the federal financial aid criteria, which really drives it all, right? So what I heard is that the committee says, hey, maybe our discussion overshot the target here because we're ultimately bound by the federal definition of what full-time and part-time is, and that we should reflect that federal definition. Is I think
Okay, if that's what you want to do, I don't, for this, I don't think you're bound by any particular standard, but if the idea is to have the standard be at least part-time under the federal definition, then I can go with
I
that.
feel like it's confusing to change. Everybody, you know, students understand part-time, full-time. I was not aware of that distinction. That was so helpful, Chris. And so I would be inclined to put it back to 6, just to mirror that language. The minute you start changing things from what is commonly understood, you open up just misunderstandings and confusion.
Well, students understand credits.
Yeah.
Scott?
Try this. So Madam Chair, this is Scott Wright. I make a motion to authorize the chair to present the draft of these rules to the board, subject to further revision and analysis by the committee.
Do I hear a second?
This is Cynthia Killingsworth. I second.
Call for a vote on this?
Yes.
Scott?
Scott Wright, aye.
Mary?
Mary Savage, aye.
Cynthia?
Cynthia Killingsworth, aye.
Claire?
Claire Costin, aye.
Elizabeth Ulmer, aye. The motion passes. I think I got everybody who's a committee member. Okay. Wow, with 3 minutes to spare, I win on that one. You guys are a fabulous committee. I just want to say that.
Yeah, you are.
All right. Okay, so meeting is adjourned then, I believe.
Yes.
Can
and
I
if you
adjourn
could just put the
meeting,
time
Martin?
on the record?
Meeting
please.
is adjourned at 10:57 a.m. on May 2nd, 2025. And I will follow up, Martin, by email